Hi, welcome back to TFT, Truth Fairy Tidbits. I'm going to go real quick today. If you don't know what I'm doing here, go back and watch the other episodes and the introduction. It explains what I'm trying to do. I got a lot to read today, so we're going to jump right in. Sharing tidbits of information that most people wouldn't otherwise look at. So I'm trying to spoon feed it to you in little bits, trying to get more people to wake the fuck up. So these are the things that helped me to deprogram and wake the fuck up. So I'm trying to share it with you. So we got a lot to do today, so let's get into it. Constitution of no authority, no treason, Lysander Spooner. So now we've been talking about consent and how government is not legitimate unless it is 100% voluntary consent based, which it claims to be. It's clearly not, because none of us have actually consented to it. So now we're going to get into the Constitution, where the majority of you statists like to cling to as some kind of holy grail as to why and how government exists, especially Red Team. So he's about to explain why it's completely illegitimate and irrational to think that the Constitution that they came up with 200 years ago applies to the rest of us for eternity. So apparently I still have a frog in my throat. I don't know what's happening, but I got a lot to read, so here we go. Go as quick as I can. The Constitution says, we all know what the Constitution, well, you should know what the Constitution says, but we, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. The meaning of this is simply, we, the people of the United States, acting freely and voluntarily as individuals, consent and agree that we will cooperate with each other in sustaining such a government as is provided in this Constitution. Okay, the necessity for the consent of the people is implied in this declaration, and the whole authority of the Constitution rests upon it. No one's consent could be presumed against him without his actual consent being given, any more than in the case of any other contract to pay money or render service. The most that can be inferred from the wording "we the people" is that the instrument offered membership to all the people of the United States, leaving it for them to accept or refuse it. This agreement is a simple one, like any other agreement. It is the same thing as saying, we, the people of town A, agree to sustain a church, a school, a hospital, or theater for ourselves and our children. Such an agreement clearly could have no validity except as between those who actually consented to it. If only a portion of the people consented, people of town A consented, but then proceeded to compel contributions of money or service from those who had not consented, they would be mere robbers and would deserve to be treated as such. Taxation, anyone? Okay, the number who actually consented to the Constitution of the United States at the first was very small. The women, children, and blacks, of course, were not asked to give their consent. In addition, there were, in nearly or quite all states, property qualifications that excluded up to 3/4 of all the white male adults. And of those who were allowed, we know not how many exercised it. Furthermore, those who originally agreed to the Constitution could thereby bind nobody that should come after them. They could contract for nobody but themselves. They had no more natural right or power to make a political contract binding upon succeeding generations than they would have to make a marriage or business contract binding on succeeding generations. You're starting to see how retarded this is. Still further, even those who actually voted for the adoption of the Constitution did not pledge their faith for any specific time. Since no specific time was named in the Constitution. Fuck's sake, can we get it together? The Constitution, during which the association should continue. It was therefore merely an association during pleasure, meaning as they felt like it, even as between the original parties to it. Still less, if possible, has it been anything more than a merely voluntary association during pleasure between the succeeding generations who have never gone through, as their fathers did, with so much as even an outward formality of adopting it or pledging their faith to support it. Any one man or any number of men have had perfect right at any time to refuse his or their further support, and nobody could rightfully object to his or their withdrawal. Still further, the consent, therefore, that has been given, whether by individuals or by the states, has been at most only a consent for the time being and not engagement for the future. In truth, in the case of individuals, their actual voting is not to be taken as proof of consent, even for the time being. On the contrary, it is to be considered that without his consent having ever been asked, a man finds himself environed by a government that he cannot resist, a government that forces him to pay money, render service, and forego the exercise of many of his natural rights under the peril of weighty punishments. He sees, too, that other men practice this tyranny over him by the use of the ballot. He sees further that if he will use the ballot himself, he has some chance of relieving himself from the tyranny of others by subjecting them to his own. In short, he finds himself, without his consent, so situated that if he use the ballot, he may become a master. If he does not use it, he must become a slave. And he has no other alternative than these two. In self-defense, he attempts the former. His case is analogous to that of a man who has been forced into battle, where he must either kill others or be killed himself. Because to save his own life in battle, a man attempts to take the lives of his opponents, is not to be inferred that the battle is one of his own choosing. On the contrary, it is to be considered in an exigency into which he had been forced by others, and in which no other means of self-defense offered, he, as a matter of necessity, used the only one that was left to him. This is talking, basically, voting is not your consent to anything. Picking a lesser of two evils in an attempt to make your situation better does not equate to consent. Okay, and besides that, voting is an act of aggression because, like he said, you vote in hopes that your will be forced on others instead of theirs being forced on you. Okay, in no way is that fucking consent. Let's keep going. We're getting close. Doubtless, the most miserable of men under the most oppressive government in the world, if allowed a ballot, will use it if they could see any chance of thereby improving their conditions. But it would not, therefore, be a legitimate inference that the government itself that crushes them was one which they had Lord. It would not, therefore, be a legitimate inference that the government itself that crushes them was one which they had voluntarily set up or even consented to. Therefore, a man's voting under the Constitution of the United States is not to be taken as evidence that he ever freely assented to the Constitution, even for the time being. Consequently, we have no proof that any very large portion, even of the actual voters of the United States, ever really voluntarily consented to the Constitution, even for the time being. Nor can we ever have such proof until every man is left perfectly free to consent or not, without thereby subjecting himself or his property to injury or trespass from others. Okay, that was a lot. Thank you for suffering through that. I can't read today, apparently. Okay, so are we getting the point now? That ought to really piss a lot of you off if you think about it and you still believe that the Constitution somehow applies to us 200 years later. Even in the time being, barely anybody did actually consent to it and agree to try to, live under that idea. I'm not saying it was a bad idea in the beginning, because yes, like I said, I think yesterday, they told the crown to fuck off and we want to do our own thing. They come up with this American experiment, and that's cool, but how quickly it turns into, well, I didn't consent to that. Somehow it's like, well, it doesn't matter. That's what we have. So your only option here, if you don't want to be fucked this way by blue team, then pick a different color and get fucked a different way. Okay? There are no sides. We'll come to that eventually. I'm trying to get you to understand the basis that the government, the United States government, has never been legitimate in what its entire existence, really. And while it might have been a good idea, and while there might have been legitimately noble causes and people joining in hopes that we make prosperity, blah blah blah, lots of noble people that think that they're doing the right thing by getting into government or voting for government or whatever. But if you think down to the basics here, it's not legitimate unless every single individual person consents and does it voluntarily. And if I don't consent and I don't want to play, I should be not forced to do it because I live in this country, okay? And again, there are no sides, okay? It's red team and blue team. They have you thinking their sides so that you keep playing the fucking game. The powers over here, they don't give a shit which side you vote for. They don't care. All they care about is that you keep believing that they are legitimate and that you have to do whatever they say. Okay? That's it. I'm done. That was quicker than I thought, but I don't want to get into another rambling thing and get off the topic again. So we'll keep going maybe tomorrow. Okay, calm. Remember, do not comply. Bye.